Hi, my name is Dan and I'm one of the DT evangelists here at Digital Tutors. In this video, we're going to look at a question from one of our users, lextrickett, on how to set up a depth pass. Okay, so to illustrate this, I have a scene from the Mental Ray Rendering Techniques Interiors course. Now there's a couple different ways that we can set up a depth pass, and which process we use really is kind of dependent on what your particular project requires or what workflow you prefer. One of them is to use the render passes method to set up an actual depth pass. So to do that, we'll come into our render tab here. You can see I have my color layer. So let's set up a depth pass here on this layer. Okay, so I'm going to open up my render settings, and we'll want to add in a pass. Just click on the icon here to create a new render pass, and let's come down to our camera depth. Okay, select that, hit create and close, and that will apply that to our scene. So now we need to actually associate that with this particular render pass. So to do that, we'll just go ahead and click on the associate button, and we can see that's been associated with our render pass. Okay, so if I double click on the pass here, what that's going to do is that's going to open up in the attribute editor. So the first thing we're going to notice for this pass is that it's going to require a 32-bit image. Okay, so before I go any further, let's make sure that our render settings are set to actually render out a 32-bit image so that we can see this pass. So here in my render settings, I'll click on the quality tab, give it a second to load there. And if we come all the way down to the frame buffer, we can come down and make sure that we're using something that is a 32-bit data type. Okay, so with that set, next thing we need to do is make sure that the image type that we're using actually supports 32-bit. So I'll come over to my Common tab, and usually I prefer to use something like an OpenEXR format, as that seems to handle the 32-bit images pretty well. So I'll switch that. Okay, so back here in our attribute editor, if we come down, we'll notice this remap depth values. Now right now, close out of my render settings here, if I select my camera, we can see that the near clip plane and the far clip plane are set to pretty extreme values. Notice it's at 0.3 Maya units and about 10,000 Maya units. So the resulting depth map that we get back from this may not be something that we can use. So we can either adjust that here in the camera we're going to be rendering from, or if we come back into our passes here and open up the attributes for that pass, we can actually enable the remap depth values, and that's going to override the clipping plane for the camera with the values that we have here. So I'm going to enable that and actually just leave the settings here at the default to see how that comes out. And let's take a look at another method that we can use in order to render out a depth pass. So I'm actually going to get two depth passes rendered out. To do that, we can actually set up another render layer. So I'll go ahead and copy this layer here. We can call this our depth layer. And with the depth layer selected, if we right click on it and come all the way down, it looks like it might be cutting off in the video. Let's go ahead and move this up. We can come all the way down to attributes. So if we select that, what that's going to do is open up the attribute editor for this render layer. And here under the presets button, we actually have a preset for luminance depth. So if we select that, what that's going to do is it's going to automatically set up an override for this layer with a depth layer. So let's take a look here in the hypershade. You can see right away our Mental Ray materials aren't going to render because it's actually set up the Maya software renderer as an override. And if we come in, we can find the actual pass here. Actually, let me go ahead and refresh this here. And there's our surface shaders being applied to the overall layer. Okay, so basically the way this is set up, if we look at the connections here, is it's going to sample the information and then send that to the surface shader that's overriding all of our geometry. Okay, so with that set up, let's go ahead and batch render this out and take a look at how we can composite this in our package. So let's open up a composite here and import our images. So go to File, Import, and we have our depth layer and our color layer. So I'm going to open up the color layer first. We have our depth pass and our beauty, so let's just import both of those and come into our depth layer and import the depth that was created by the luminance depth preset. Okay, so this is our master beauty and then our depth here. Actually, we may need to come into the options and notice that we'll have our depth pass as one of the channels that gets imported from the open, or that's due to the open EXR format that we used. Now, right away, we'll notice that we're getting different results from the depth pass and the luminance depth pass that we rendered out using the Maya software renderer. So which one you use, I mean, you can always go back in to Maya and adjust some of the settings, like the clipping planes that we talked about, in order to get different results. But let's take a look at these to see what kind of results we can get. First thing I want to do is actually switch so I'm seeing my RGB channels and not my alpha channel there. There we go. So let's come in and create a blur node. With this added in, we can hook in our beauty and the depth pass into the modulation here. And if we come into the modulation tab now, we can adjust the actual blur as well as the offset, which is going to tell Composite where to focus in on. So I'll choose the little eyedropper here, and let's click something far in the back. And we can see that when I increase the blur, it's actually blurring up here while keeping the area that we selected in focus. So what's really cool about this is we can actually come in, say if I'm on frame 1, I can right click and set a keyframe on this offset, and then come into my last frame and select something here in the foreground and set another keyframe. So that way when we play through our composition, we can see that our focus is going from back to front. So we can actually animate the depth of field very, very quickly. So real quick, let's just take a look at the results that we get from our luminance depth pass. We can see that it's going to be fairly similar. Depending on your particular project, the workflow that you prefer could determine which method that you use in order to get your depth pass. But that's a quick look at how we can set up a depth pass by either using the depth render pass or by setting up another render layer with the luminance depth override and then going in and animating that depth pass in Composite. Now, if you want to learn some more about how you can take advantage of render passes for your project, check out the Render Passes in Maya 2009 course.